And you're looking at a live picture outside the courthouse in Lower Manhattan. Yep.
We're following breaking news as we come on the air tonight. Sean Diddy Combs acquitted of the most serious charges against him. These are live pictures from the courthouse where we are now waiting to learn if he will be released from jail. Good evening. Thanks for joining us. I'm Natasha Verma.
And I'm Bianca Peters in for Steve. Diddy found guilty on 2 of the 5 counts that he was facing. They are the lesser offenses, so his defense team has asked for his release.
Diddy's bail hearing is scheduled to begin at any moment now. The judge asking both sides to submit letters arguing for and against his release.
Now, if Diddy is released from jail, he would likely be subject to specific conditions while awaiting sentencing, as his legal team has proposed a $1 million bond and travel restrictions as well.
And this morning, Diddy was found not guilty of racketeering conspiracy and 2 counts of sex trafficking, but he was found guilty on 2 counts of transportation to engage in prostitution. So that means he could still face prison time, but may be released while awaiting sentencing.
Also, right now, we are waiting for the judge's decision on that. So let's get right over to Lisa Evers, who's been outside the courthouse all morning long into this evening. Lisa, what are you hearing?
Well, Bianca, Natasha, just think about this. That verdict came out early this morning, and Sean Diddy Combs has been in a holding pen the entire day waiting for this whole issue to be resolved. Instead of resolving that bail question right after the verdict was read, the prosecutors asked for several more hours in order to try and put their position together, which their position being they want to keep Sean Diddy Combs behind bars, even though he was cleared of the 2 most serious charges in this case. But let's bring in right now criminal defense attorney and former Manhattan prosecutor Jeremy Sallin to get some understanding about this whole bail process that's going on right now. Jeremy, thank you so much for being with us. A little unusual for them to delay the bail hearing like this so many hours after the verdict?
There's nothing usual about this case. Everything about it's unusual, especially when you think about the magnitude of the charges that were brought against Sean Combs, and to be cut down, for lack of a better term, by the prosecution right at the knees, leaving him with a crime that does not mandate incarceration, though he's already been in for 10 months. And now it's a very fair question to ask. Bail Reform Act aside about keeping him in, why should he not get out when he's not facing mandatory incarceration?
But what at this point would you say the prosecution's or the prosecutors' main concerns are about if they let him out on bail?
I think there's an integrity check here. Do I really believe, or do they really believe, that he's a danger to the community at large, he's a danger to any particular people, that he's not going to return to court? That's a hard stretch, considering the man came down prior to being in charge. The man surrendered his passport. There's been no allegations since the accusations began that he's made any threats. And the bottom line is all of those things he's accused him of in terms of violence, guess what? He was acquitted, not a conviction.
Right, and I think that's the thing that's so hard for us to understand. So one of the bail denials, because there were several attempts to get him bail all the way through this process. The prosecution said, well, we're worried about him intimidating witnesses. But that would even be a point right now because he was cleared of the sex trafficking and the RICO charges, right?
Yeah, I think it's a heavy lift, even more so than the RICO charge itself, for the prosecution with a straight face to say, this man is a danger to society, this man is a danger to any particular women, this man is a risk of flight. Absolutely not. And the evidence doesn't bear it out in terms of what he's been convicted of, and nor does the history in terms of his compliance with returning to court or behaving and following the judge's instructions. I think they come up empty-handed, but again, there's something called the Bail Reform Act, which says in substance, barring exception, he should be held in.
And then in terms of the final decision, that should be the judge, right, that will make that decision based upon these letters that he's gotten that Natasha and Bianca were talking about from the prosecution and the defense.
Yeah, he's going to have to assess everything. He's going to be the arbiter of everything. The defense is saying, let's set $1 million. Combs will easily make that and be out. You can monitor him. We can regulate where he travels to in certain jurisdictions he can go. It can be done, and there's really no reason from a practical standpoint. And to be clear, he, yes, faces up to 10 years in prison, theoretically consecutive. That's never going to happen to 20 years. We're talking potentially months and nominal years if he's ultimately sentenced to that.
For that, on the transportation for prostitution for charges. But then in terms of the conditions and that they would have to satisfy, there were other things that he had offered in the past that were turned down by the government. An ankle monitor bracelet, having 24-hour security watching him. What about that? Do you think there'll be special circumstances or conditions that maybe a regular prison, I shouldn't say regular, but another detainee with a similar conviction would be not asked
I think a regular detainee with a similar conviction would not have to have an ankle bracelet with 24/7 monitoring by security. Hand in your passport. The defense counsel already has that. Stay in certain venues, drug tests. Don't leave New York or Florida where you reside. Post bond if you need to, in terms of the $1 million, if that's what's being asked by the defense. Those are reasonable things to ask. Is he going to return to court? Yes. If you have evidence that he makes a threat, you put him back in.
And then you've tried many big cases. What role does his family presence have? It's been very strong, very consistent, especially this last final week. His mother's been there every single day. He said his 85-year-old mother, in one of the defense application, he needs to be the main caretaker for his 85-year-old mother, Mrs. Janice Combs, who's been here every single day, and also be a father to his 3-year-old baby daughter. And then we've seen the other kids, the grown kids in there, and other extended family members. What effect does that have on a judge in this kind of decision?
So family ties are critical to show community ties. Family ties are critical to show you're not going to flee and you're going to return to court. However, let's not overstate. I think the defense has to be careful. Well, if he's a primary caretaker, who's been taking care of him for the past 10 months? If he's a primary caretaker for a young child, obviously someone else has been doing it. Let's not overstate, but let's also be very clear. They showed their support. They came for him. They're available for him. They're going to ensure his return.
They offered one of the bail packages previously that was denied by the judge and by the court was $50 million. Do you think this is going to be, we're going to be in the 7 figures to 8 figures?
Assuming that the judge agrees to release him, it's either going to be release him, or subject to certain conditions, or it's going to be much, much more nominal in terms of what that dollar amount is. There's no reason, if it was that high or higher, when you're talking about violent, ugly crimes, they don't exist. They're gone. Granted, I will say this, the prosecution at the time of sentencing can raise that evidence, even though he was acquitted, for the purposes of sentencing. So there is still that element, but bail needs to be reduced or he needs to be released.
All right, and we'll stay tuned and find out. Jeremy Selden, thank you so much for being with us. And again, if you're just joining us right now, the bail hearing for Sean Diddy Combs happening inside this courthouse. He'll find out whether tonight he's going to go back to the Metropolitan Detention Center that has been named by numerous prison watch groups as one of the worst in the United States in terms of conditions, or whether he'll be in a much more comfortable setting for his first night out after this verdict was released. Anyway, that's the latest here from federal court. Natasha and Bianca, back to you in the studio.
All right, Lisa, thank you so much. Keep watching Fox 5 for continuing coverage of this breaking Diddy verdict. We're going to have more legal analysis coming up.
on record for the year so far. Let's have a listen in on what it sounded like outside the courthouse when Sean Diddy Combs' mother emerged after the verdict was rendered. We saw her blowing kisses to people and other people cheering them on. Now, not only has she been coming to court, as Lisa had just said, but his family, his sons have been coming. A short time separate from that, we saw out of the back entrance of this federal courthouse, the jurors. Hey.
QuickBooks is great in terms of getting paid quick because I can access QuickBooks from my phone. So if we're at the beach, I can write an invoice and send it.
All right, well, this is breaking news right now. Let's come back on camera for this, and let's bring in Lisa Evers here. We're learning right now, Lisa, that apparently bond has been denied.
Okay, that's
well, I don't know if that's getting it. Let's use this one.
Let's get Jeremy here.
Yeah, Jeremy, can you come back in here when you get a moment? So what we had been positioned for was an argument that because the jury found Sean Diddy Combs guilty only on the lesser of the charges, that there was a presumption that he might be able to go home. The judge even asked him at one point, I imagine you don't want to go back to MDC. He nodded vigorously. Right? Let's use this microphone. I'm not sure if that one works. And Jeremy, if you'll come in here
Jeremy.
too. Should we start with Jeremy's reaction?
Jeremy Salland is with us. He's a criminal defense attorney and former Manhattan prosecutor. And the bail, the news is that bail has been denied.
Yeah, that the judge.
So there is the law, the statute says in substance that bail would be denied, meaning that he goes in and stays in. There's not an exception. For example, there could be an exception where the prosecution says we consent, and there's other pieces to it as well. There could be a danger to somebody or not, but the bail being kept as it is not necessarily atypical because of the law, though one would believe the fact that he was not convicted of the top charge, and it's been a reduction, and people do walk free and come back and RROR'd.
Well, keeping the bail as it is means there's no bail.
Right. So he's remanded, he's held without bail. So this doesn't change the potential sentence, obviously, because it's still up to 10 years, but for the immediate gratification purposes of getting out, doing what he needs to do and fighting this from the outside in terms of preparing for that sentencing, now it's been stripped.
And let me just add, this morning the prosecution was very adamant about wanting to have this extra time to present their argument to the judge, and seemed obviously they were disappointed with the verdict. It was very visible and very obvious, but they wanted to keep him behind bars, and they said, Your Honor, we need several hours to really get this whole argument together for you, and that's pretty stunning.
But again, I think you have to go back to what the law is and what it allows for, and generally speaking, barring some exception, the Bail Reform Act says you're staying, you're not just getting released. He was convicted of a crime. I think people, rightfully so, are disappointed and have questions from the public's perspective when you have such a horrific allegation that is not proven or substantiated beyond a reasonable doubt. And summarily, we're not talking about on the cusp. That's a pretty quick verdict that I think fooled many people, thinking that there might have been a sex trafficking conviction. He's walking scot-free in terms of any allegation of coercion, force, fraud, violence, but he's still in custody.
Okay, so Jeremy, what about?
Can we just ask Jeremy, was it a difficult decision for the judge legally?
I think the judge is, no, I think the judge is not finding any exception and following the law, and that's why he's staying there. The hope from the prosecution, though they didn't, pardon me, the defense, though they didn't raise it specifically in their letter to the court, was that, yes, there may be the Bail Reform Act, and that was what the prosecution relied on, said statutorily you can't just let him walk. The prosecution was hoping, the defense was hoping that the judge would look past that and say, he's returned, he just shows that he can follow the court order, he's not going to flee, and he's not a danger to anyone specifically or the community at large.
And then let me ask you this, in terms of the appealing this decision, what's the process now that the defense will have to go through in order to appeal the judge's decision of no bail?
I would expect that he's not going anywhere anytime soon, appeal or not. I think that they're going to follow the judge. You know, I haven't heard what the judge said, so it's hard for me to just speak on an island here, but based on the law as we know it, I think the judge has ample ground to stand on and make this decision.
Let me answer that. Our Sharon Crowley has been watching this and telling us right now the judge says that the government was correct that the detention is mandatory for a Mann Act conviction, what you're indicating, and the judge said that the limited exception to mandatory detention was not met. Sean Combs pointed to his duties as a father and a son, which we talked about, but that does not rise to the level of an appropriate exception, according to the judge.
Right. And to my point moments ago, that's what the law is. But we like to think that from the outside looking in, when someone has been charged with such egregious and horrible acts and a jury of your peers says no so quickly, there should be a means to say you should be free, but there still is a conviction. The Mann Act qualifies. He's in custody. Whether that's a sign of the judge saying I'm going to harshly sentence him or not, we can't say, but let's not read into it. The judge is simply following the law, and this warrant does not warrant that 10 years that you're hearing about for each of the counts for Jane
and then Jeremy, remind us again about the Mann Act.
So the Mann Act does not involve coercion or force or anything like that. The Mann Act simply says that if you're bringing someone across state lines in substance, engaging in prostitution, that violates the law. I look at this case, not to really go too far off, this really, especially when you hear this verdict, should likely never have been in that courthouse. If anything, it should have been in that courthouse, meaning 100 Center Street or something similar, in a state courthouse for domestic violence, for abuse, for things that physical abuse and assaultive behavior, those types of things. But now we're here, it is what it is, but I think the prosecution really got humbled whether or not the judge is keeping Sean Combs in.
No, 100%. So now tonight he'll be spending the night in MDC.
It's hotter in there than it is out here, certainly for him, but there is now a horizon.
Right.
That sun is rising for him. There is an out, and I'd like to think, based on the evidence and based on the finding of that jury, that out will be reasonable, and the defense said maybe 20 to 24 months. The prosecution is saying at least 50 to 60 months, even more. Where the judge falls, I don't know, but there's freedom for a guy who's looking at life in prison, which is unbelievable, whether he's in jail tonight or not.
And you told us that there's no minimum with the conviction, the prostitution conviction.
Correct, but there are guidelines, and the judges generally follow those guidelines. There's ability to move along them and go up or down. But I think we have to look at what the evidence is and remember that the prosecution can still bring out in sentencing, though you could not do that in a state court, all of his other allegations and the evidence there that was not supported by the jurors who said not guilty, because it's not proof beyond a reasonable doubt. It's sentencing. It's not the same standard.
Right.
But do I think he's going to get 10 years? We've been wrong before. No, I do not. There is an out for him.
All right. And we'll continue watching this closely. And so that's it.
That's it for now. That's it for today.
Yeah, just to sum up, this has been a day of news on the Sean Diddy Combs case. First, the jury came back and rendered a not guilty verdict on the heavier charges of the indictment. And then there was this talk about whether or not he would be walking out of here. There were a lot of reasons why some people thought that might actually be the case. But at this point, we've just learned that the judge has denied the application for bail, which means instead of walking out a free man today, Sean Combs will have to wait. And the judge noted, we're told right now by Sharon Crowley, that one of the incidents of violence against a former girlfriend was in June of 2024, after Sean Combs knew that he perhaps was illegal. Right. So there are things in the bag, so to speak, that the judge is taking into consideration, that as people out on the street, maybe we were slower to get to, but the judge has made his decision. Sean Combs will not be seen on camera outside the courthouse today, at least not as a somewhat free man on bail. That's the latest from here at the federal courthouse in Lower Manhattan. We go back to you guys.
I was going to say, Arthur, before you go, maybe one more last question. We do know that by law that detention is mandatory under the counts he was convicted on, but maybe you could explain some other reasons, or the top reason why the judge refused bail.
Well, it was actually, as Jeremy Salan so kindly shared just now, that bail typically isn't decided after the jury's decision, the jury's verdict. A bail is decided before the trial goes into play, right? And then they decide whether or not to hold a defendant in that case. That had already happened in this case. The decision was made to hold Sean Combs behind bars during the length of these court proceedings, and they're not over yet, right? We have to get through sentencing for this to actually truly be over. So what Jeremy was explaining was it would have required an exception to the decision that he already made, and he said based on multiple factors that it doesn't rise to the level of granting an exception at this time. I don't know if I put that in English.
Arthur, thank you very much. Lisa as well, and Jeremy. We've got more breaking news coverage after this break.
News.
Welcome back. Some breaking news now at 5:30. Sean Diddy Combs has been denied bail. Some breaking news here. Is going to be remaining behind bars following a partial verdict in his federal case. Manhattan jury found him guilty on 2 counts of transporting individuals for prostitution, but acquitted him on sex trafficking and racketeering charges. Now, despite the mixed outcome, the judge did rule that Diddy must stay in custody, citing consequences and seriousnesses of the convictions at hand.
Big news today. Let's get right to Lisa Evers, who's live in front of the courthouse. Lisa, what was the decision by the judge to deny bail for Diddy?
Well, Bianca, Natasha, first of all, this, I'm sure, was a tremendous disappointment to his mother and to his children and to his other family, and as well as to the supporters that we've seen out here outside of the courthouse. But in terms of the legality of it, according to Attorney Jeremy Sallin, who we've been speaking with this hour, he said that this is fairly standard in terms of a conviction on these prostitution transportation charges, which are the 2 counts that Diddy was found guilty of. Now, what the big argument and the big push to keep him behind bars obviously came from the prosecutors. I'm sure it seemed that they were very upset about the verdict from the jury not getting that RICO case that they had pushed so hard for against the better advice of some in the legal community who didn't think that was appropriate in this particular circumstance. They also lost out on the sex trafficking. That was not guilty. And they said at this morning, the prosecution said, Your Honor, we need several hours to come back and consider bail. Otherwise, they would have just considered the bail, the bail application and the bail situation right there shortly after the verdict was read. That was not the case. They were granted all these extra hours, the extra afternoon. Sean Diddy Combs sitting in a holding cell all the while this afternoon while they're crafting these letters to the judge to explain their positions. And the defense was arguing his mother, who we've seen many times here on Fox 5, going in and out of court every single day to support her son. She's 85 years old. The argument of the defense was that he's her primary caregiver, and certainly he is the closest relative to her, and that he also has a 3-year-old baby daughter, baby love Sean Combs, and that's her name. And so that was their argument, but the prosecution he still remains a danger. They wanted him behind bars until the sentencing, and this was, I'm sure, was devastating to Combs and many of the family who seemed elated. They were elated, in fact, when they heard those not guilty verdicts. But it's one more step, and as we've seen with Combs in other situations, once he's determined, he's going to see it through. The worst is over in one sense, in that he is no longer looking at life behind bars. On the other hand, his attorneys will have to file an appeal to this denial of bail. And remember, they had several bail applications throughout the course of the pre-trial conferences and after his arrest that were completely denied, and those were just eye-popping bail packages: $50 million, 24-hour armed guards, an Upper East Side apartment where there was limited access, no internet access for him, monitoring cameras, monitoring his activities, no guests allowed coming in, and that was denied. So we'll see what happens now, but this has to be a devastating blow for the family. The family's been very united and come together at this. We saw the 2 sprinters that have taken most of the family after 1 o'clock this afternoon, or a little bit earlier, a little bit after that, excuse me, after we found out that the hearing would be at 5 o'clock. They all went out together to have lunch, to have something to eat, if in fact they could do that. I'm sure many of them thinking, okay, you know what, Dad's coming home, my son's coming home, that type of thing. And he will not have to spend another night in the MDC, the Metropolitan Detention Center, which is a place nobody wants to go. And so that's what it is. It's just a devastating blow for them. They went from this high this morning of realizing that there's just those 2 counts of the prostitution transportation that they're facing, and that that can be dealt with over time. That's a far cry, Bianca, Natasha, from looking at the possibility of life behind bars, which would have been with the RICO case and many decades on the sex trafficking case, because that also carries a very, very heavy penalty. But that's it for today so far. And then tomorrow the courtroom will be Tomorrow, the whole courthouse is on administrative leave, is on administrative closure, meaning that they will be. We're getting excuse me one second. We're getting interference from all the helicopters up above. So tomorrow,
Lisa,
the courthouse that you see right behind me, where the trial's taking place and where this bail hearing just happened, that will be closed for an administrative closure. There will be no activity there, no scheduled activity there. Friday, the courthouse is federal holiday closed. It's always closed on Saturdays and Sundays. So there was obviously a pressure to get this decision in before the holiday weekend, and I'm sure there's a lot of disappointment all the way around that they just couldn't bring him home tonight. Natasha and Bianca?
Yeah, Lisa, you mentioned that the $50 million bail package, which is pretty extreme. Why was that not enough to convince the court to let him go on bond here, especially with all those other extra things you were talking about?
Could you repeat that again? I'm sorry.
Could
you repeat that again?
The $50 million bond and bail package that you mentioned, including the other restrictions, those list of restrictions that you mentioned, you would think that that would be enough for a judge to say, all right, I can agree to this, but it wasn't. So there was a reason behind that, and why was that?
Yes. Well, the reason behind that, and that's a great question. The reason behind that particular denial was the fact that the feds, when you're in prison or you're in jail, they're monitoring all your calls, and they tell you straight up, we're monitoring all your calls. The prosecutor, the lead prosecutor, Maureen Comey, told the judge that he had been using other people's phone privileges, because when you're a detainee, you only have a certain number of phone calls at a certain time, using other people's phone privileges to make calls to intimidate witnesses, and that this would not be allowed. And then, as we've heard throughout the day here today with some of our legal experts, that witness intimidation is a crime or an allegation they take extremely seriously here. But the question is that even a factor now, because he was not convicted of the sex trafficking or the RICO. So I'm sure it was very disappointing for the defense. For the prosecution, it was like, well, at least we got something, and they got the transportation for prostitution. But I think it was a big come down for the federal prosecutors. That's what pretty much every legal commentator and legal expert is telling us today. That's the latest here from federal court. Natasha and Bianca, back to you in the studio.
Yeah, definitely a high to a low. All right, Lisa, thank you very much.
And keep watching Fox 5 News for continuing coverage of the Diddy verdict. We will.
Back, Woody.
Most of the people out here have been with us. We actually offered them a Diddy party that we were going to try to throw tonight, and they were willing to come. So
I'm going.
I think, yeah, he's going. So
I got my oils and I got my Astro glide too. My backpack.
Oh, yeah. It's a good crowd. I like it.
Finally, can I get your first and last name and what part of this?
So my name is
Zealous that his of the jury's verdict, there was a sense of celebration out here. Sean Combs' mother came out here at one point. Everybody was cheering. She was blowing kisses to people in the crowd. And then certainly as we got closer to 4 or 5 o'clock towards the end of people's workday, and as this information had gone around, there were even more people who were coming to this area, and everybody has their phones up and are live streaming. So that's a mood out here. Definitely more subdued now that there's this tidbit of information that's circling through the crowd right now. I think people are just beginning to hear about the fact that bail was denied for Mr. Combs, but that's what it's been like out here. Some tourists, but not a lot.
Got it. Thanks so much, Arthur. Don't go anywhere. We have some new information I'm going to be telling you about in just a second here. We talked about the sentencing possibly being in October, but the defense is pushing back hard on that. They want sentencing as soon as even next week. They are pushing back, so we may get new information about that because, of course, they want this to be over as quickly as possible. Despite the setback today, I have to say, Arthur, this is still quite the victory for Sean Combs and his defense team today. He could have been looking at a much longer prison term. And so even though he has to remain locked up right now, he is facing a much less punishment for the crimes the jury found him guilty of earlier today. So, a circus because, Arthur, as we've discussed a little bit when we were talking before, this case has generated national attention. Just think about it. Sean Diddy Combs, one of the most famous people in the world, and skyrocketed to fame in the 1990s and continued to grow and expand his businesses to all kinds of things, to clothing, constantly changing his names. You probably heard me call him all the names I could think of because each time, each brand has a different name associated with it. So that is part of the reason that some of this public interest is happening in this case, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, absolutely. And while we are in this moment absorbed with the recent breaking development that Sean Combs is not going to be a free man tonight, what the jury essentially did today is ensure that he will spend a good portion of his life as a free man. Going into today, it was not clear if he was ever going to see daylight again. Right? So today, with the jury's decision at 10 a.m., they gave him the opportunity to live his life out from behind bars. What the judge has decided now is because, as the judge put it, domestic violence is domestic violence, and the defense clearly said, he's a domestic violence, he's an abuser, but he's not the racketeering kind of guy that the feds want to portray him to be. The judge said, we still got crimes here, and for that reason, it's not a total victory, but certainly if we take a step back in terms of what he was facing in this case, this is an entirely new day for Sean Diddy Combs.
We do appreciate your coverage out there. We have a split shot of you up right now and the crowd right outside the front doors. Are we hoping to hear shortly from the attorneys on both sides? Are you expecting that? I know there's a bank of microphones set up there. Do you think we'll hear from the defense and the prosecution? I know that they weren't talking during the trial.
We've done everything we can, as you see from the podium, to invite them to come speak. So far as the federal prosecutors are concerned, I'm going to go out on a limb and say absolutely not. This was not a victory for them. I don't think they want to say anything about this. About an hour ago or so, they did release a statement talking about the serious nature of the accusations that were made against Sean Diddy Combs. So they're gonna hold steady on that, although the jury has said they didn't buy it, right? But I do not expect the U.S. attorney to be out here. In terms of Sean Combs' defense, they're going to have to be careful now. Before Sean Combs is going to walk out, they might have said something, but they could still be positioning themselves for an appeal on those 2 counts he was found guilty of. So it's kind of anybody's guess right now. We're going to have to see.
Got it. That's great. The other thing I wanted to point out to you today, Arthur, is, as this weeks-long trial has gone on, what makes it stand out, and we've covered a lot of celebrity trials together, is the explicit nature of the testimony. And 2 women, one named Cassie Ventura, the other one used a pseudonym, describing violent, years-long relationship with Sean Diddy Combs. And obviously, the defense argued that it was consensual, that he was not coercing them into what was happening. Otherwise, he might have faced different charges. But it's really interesting, and I'm eager to hear how Sean Diddy Combs reacted when he heard that his bail was denied, because he was so emotional earlier today, whether he had a strong reaction as to what happened. And obviously, his defense is hoping not to wait till October for the sentencing, but for it to happen in the next week, as early as in the next week. And apparently the government is not protesting that. So that may happen. We may have a quicker development in this case. We'll find out as soon as we get some more information from inside the courtroom. But what a week. You point out the July 4th holiday, and having covered so many court cases, usually on a Friday, even if it's not a holiday weekend, the jury is eager to get out. And it seemed like all they needed was one night of good night's sleep to render a verdict within under an hour today when you were out there this morning. I'm sure it was pretty chaotic.
Yeah, a good night of sleep probably had something to do with it, but probably the judge's note to the jury yesterday as they were dismissing probably had a lot to do with it too, because they were essentially saying we agree on 4 out of the 5 counts, right? But the last one, we're having trouble coming to an agreement because of different, quote, opinions, plural. That's when the judge said, get back in there tomorrow morning, meaning today, and get at it. The term deadlock was used a lot, but yesterday was the first full day of deliberation for a jury that heard nearly 3 months, 2 months of evidence and from 3 dozen or more witnesses. So really it was a full day and some change, really enough to say that they were deadlocked. They just didn't agree yet. The judge was banking on that, sent them home, and maybe they were thinking about this weekend and said, you know what, I'm compelled to agree now. But I will say too, from our producer in the courtroom, we do have Sean Diddy Combs' reaction to bail being denied, and the description was the word stoic. He did not make an expression. A vastly different response, the emotional response at 10 a.m. this morning when the verdict was read, when he collapsed on the floor and started praying and waved to his family. They cheered as he walked out of the courtroom. There was none of that for this most recent development just now. We're told He was absolutely stoic.
Thank you so much for that update, Arthur. We appreciate your coverage. And
zero sugar and zero carbs. Meet natural flavor. Neutral. Refreshingly simple.
just look at some live pictures, and when those attorneys come out, if they do, or family members or anyone else who comments, we'll bring it back to you live. Thanks so much for being with us.
Wrap it up. I'll do a summary, and I want your all thoughts. Here we go, because I'm going to zoom ahead to this part in the chat. Here it is. Zooming ahead. Spoiler. Well, hold on. Let me take two. Okay. Well, the judge has denied bail for Sean Combs. I fast forwarded to the good part. I have an amazing panel. Look at this. The core four is here. It's Kim, Lewis, like a nerd report, Steph the alternate. We've been hanging out, reading Intercity Press's tweets along with CNN, New York Times. And my goodness, there were some fireworks in this courtroom. To give the summary, you can go through and read his tweets. I don't want to keep doing it. Let's just summarize the big thing that happened here. The judge denied it bigly. I will use the word. Bigly denied him. And it worries me only just because I want to make sure Diddy's getting his due process, so there's no appeals or anything else, shenanigans that can come after later. But the mic drop was the fact that, my argument was, well, this isn't a violent crime that he's actually charged with. This prostitution charge is the lesser of all the crimes, minimum sentence of like 3 years altogether. But the Mann Act complicates things, and it needs to have a, violent behavior. So here's what the judge said. The jury convicted the defendant on counts 3 and 5 for the following reasons: bail is denied. Even if the defendant was solely required to show that he is not a danger to the community, he could not meet that burden. Prior to trial, the court denied bail, and I see no reason to reverse that now. The defense conceded the defendant's violence. He talked about the video, terrible moment, and the London hotel. The violence after the searches in this case with Jane, there was in 2024, after the searches of Combs' residences. This evidence is a disregard for the law and a propensity for violence. The court takes no position on what we'll consider at sentencing, nor what sentence it will pose, but here the burden is on him and he cannot carry it. The defense argues the guideline starts at 21 months. He's done 10. So I am sentencing a Friday, October 3rd, so he could be in jail until October, but I'm willing to expedite it. And then Agnifilo, his lawyer, jumped in. They came in trying to fight back, saying this is unreasonable. And honestly, I could see this argument because it does seem like pretty hefty charge. But this is where things got the mic drop, where as Agnifilo tried to make it clear that this case wasn't like the others and this wasn't a violent case, the judge came back. You conceded to violence in your closing. They actually pulled Agnifilo's quotes. In the defense told the jury last year he went to meetings for batterers programs. The jury didn't know this, yada, yada, yada. You full-throatedly in your closing told the jury that there was violence here. He was quoting Agnifilo saying if he was guilty, if this was a case about DV, he'd be guilty. So the judge is throwing all of that back in Agnifilo's face and saying that's why he's not getting bail. And as Agnifilo kept fighting back, his children are here. Cassie fought back and triggered it, blah, blah, blah. Every argument Costco lawyer is trying to throw, the judge ain't having it. And then there was a point where he was going to speak. Diddy didn't speak. Comey, his brazenness is unmatched. They suggest it was self-defense in the Cassie video, insulting. He slapped her. He had drugs in the hotel. He invited Jane. They tried to craft a new bail package, denied. They may try a new expedited sentencing if they can get the paperwork together, I guess next week on Tuesday. But man, Diddy's going away till October potentially. And then what I see is this, and I'm going to go around and get each of your thoughts, is clearly a judge who doesn't like Diddy. Agnifilo, he doesn't like Agnifilo either, Kim. We've seen that throughout the whole case. Agnifilo's pissed him off many times. The maximum on this is 20 years. It does seem like the judge is leaning towards giving him the maximum based on this denial of bail. So even if they thought they were getting out and they had a win here, this isn't a win. If he is kept in jail till sentencing, and then in sentences he's given 20 years, he won't see daylight, get out of prison that whole time. And then he'll be, what is that, 75? Now he'll get good behavior time spent, probably more realistic, 30 years? Maybe 25 years, 20 years. That's still a lot. He's 55. So, Kim, what do you think? We were a little nervous, but now it seems like the judge might hold out and really make Diddy face some accountability. You feeling better, nervous? What do you think? I'll start with you.
My gut is telling me right now that he likely would be sentenced to 10 years total. He'll give him the max, but have it be concurrent, because that tends to be the way that, from my understanding, I could be very wrong. However, the judge can do whatever he wants. And I think Mark Agnifilo and his running his mouth has really stepped in it. And this is something we've kind of seen for a while. And I think the judge has had enough. So I think it will be interesting to see how things go. But I wouldn't be surprised if it's more than like a year at this point.
That's an interesting angle. 10 years is probably realistic. Louis Lecca, my favorite, Nerd Report, my man. So glad to have you. You've been crushing on your own recaps and so on. What do you think? What's your reaction to all this?
Let's wait to see what the judge does next week, because it could be all tough talk for a lenient decision. I don't know. Arnifilo has done a great job here. He's known as a clown. He's done a good job with Diddy. That's all I could say. People don't take him serious. That's what that's what they needed in this case, not to be taken serious. And now the RICO thing they didn't convince the jury of doing it. So we'll see next week, man. I don't know. Let's wait till what the judge does. I can't have I don't know. Next week we'll know. Judge maybe.
Steph, the alter is back. We love you. Always good to see you. She's always around lurking, but you've been doing so well out there. Congrats to everything. So happy. And I know you've avoided this case for obvious reasons, triggers, etc. But thank you for coming in near the end. What do you think about this? Are you surprised?
I'm surprised he's not being found guilty on all the charges. Looking at it logically, it makes no damn sense, which is why I'm kind of going towards like a conspiracy theory of, has he got to them in some way, shape or form? He has allegedly had that kind of rumored behavior in the past, let's say. And nothing's really changed in the system to stop that from happening again, from what I can find. In terms of what the judge is going to do next, in terms of the sentencing, I fear it's going to go the other way, that he's going to get a very minimal sentence, because that's what we see when it comes to the rich and the powerful. They're seen to be held to account, but they're really not in the end. And Diddy is a monster, but he's a monster with very powerful friends and allies. How the hell do you think he's got away with this bullshit for decades? And so I hope he gets the maximum. I hope he gets the 20 years and he rots. But ultimately, I'm not going to be surprised if he only gets a couple of years. Or yeah. I'll still won't be surprised if the judge turns around and says time served on your way, but with like conditions where he has to have a tag for like 2 years and his movements are restricted and he has to go to the parole officer every week and things like that. I wouldn't even be surprised if they gave him that.
Yeah, you're right. And the fact that, look, it's good that he has a little bit of time to digest the sentencing. I'll be honest, I think the lack of bail rather, is strange. It is still strange. I'm not mad at the judge. I'm glad, because I think Diddy is a danger. I do believe all that. But the charges that he actually got convicted of wasn't what the big charges. It is shocking to me that the prosecution whiffed it so poorly. But I want to echo what you said, Steph, the conspiracy theory people call it. I don't think it's that much of a conspiracy anymore. There are theories, and I start to wonder how true they are of, yeah, powerful people behind the scenes were putting stuff out to deflect and distract this case the whole time, throughout this whole thing, tapes of celebrities and this and that and whatever to muddy the waters, in my opinion. And I do feel like there were powerful people pulling strings, trying to ensure that Diddy did not get fully convicted because they want to be able to get away with this too later. So yeah, I don't disagree with your thought there, Steph. It's a scary thought, but was there someone else on the jury? Were there people that he got to the jury to pay them off or do whatever to be there? The fact that it was so quick was very weird to me, that they were so quick to say not guilty. You would have thought there would be some people on that jury who would have felt differently. Lewis, yeah, you're adding something?
Yeah, man. Did he have to really like verbally get to the jury? Not really. I mean, there was this guy is known to like erase serial numbers off GUNs and possibly kabooming cars, right? That was all brought up. I would be scared if I was in the jury, honestly, to go up against this guy to get my real identity found out, and then having this kind of person who's been, described as like Al Capone after me, who's gonna defend me here. I don't know. That's a possibility as well. It doesn't have to be like a direct contact to the jury, but if you're watching this, like, hey man, if I get this guy on RICO, is he gonna come after me? I don't know. I'm scared. I mean, there's probably people that report on this thing that are scared, to say what they think.
Very, very valid point. As quick state upstate says, money and baby oil are great for greasing the system. Sadly, that is not that far off. Kim, final thoughts?
I mean, today has been a very surprising day. I think, again, with this case, I feel like at every turn it just gets more and more bizarre. I hope that there are some people that are breathing a little bit easier tonight, and we will see how things go in the coming months. I'm interested in this pre-investigation thing. I don't know what's coming with that. That'll be interesting.
We shall see. We're going to keep you updated. Make sure you keep updated.
O'clock this afternoon. Now what that means is he's going to go back tonight to MDC. He'll be spending, the holiday weekend at MDC instead of being with his family and being out. But so basically a split decision and a split victory for the defense team, and the prosecution's saying that remains a danger, that he needs to be kept behind bars. And I think one of the things that weighed heavily in the judge's decision making about saying no bail was the fact that even after Sean Combs knew that he was under federal investigation, he knew that the feds were watching him, that FBI was watching him, and all of that he still continued to allegedly commit crimes. They referred to an incident with Jane, the woman who used the pseudonym Jane, where she was beaten after he had already been under surveillance and notified that he was under investigation by the feds. So a lot going on here, but right now the big news is no bail, and Sean Diddy Combs is going to be going back to MDC tonight. That's the latest from federal court. I'm Lisa Evers, Fox 5 News. Bianca, Natasha, back to you in the studio.
Some interesting pieces of information you added there, Lisa. Appreciate it. Meanwhile, certainly not the outcome Diddy or his supporters were hoping for.
Joining us now to tell us what could be next is former New York City prosecutor Seth Zuckerman. Seth, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
I think, first of all, what's your reaction to this bail denial and the judge saying that he's a violent man?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not surprised. The government put forth a very strong letter saying that incarceration was mandatory at this point, that bail must be denied unless he could find two exceptions. One is that he's not a danger and a flight risk, and that he's not a danger to the community and he's not a violent person. And the judge clearly found that he's got a propensity for violence, found that the defense even conceded that during closing arguments.
Right.
Because, the defense in this case was, he's an abuser, but he's not leading a racketeering, a criminal enterprise.
It was a key strategy in fighting the RICO.
And now that's backfired a little bit on the bail denial.
Sure.
The court clearly took that into consideration. The defendant's concessions said, even in your closing argument, you admitted that he's a violent person, and now I can consider that for bail, and I'm not going to let him out based on that. The judge clearly found that he's a danger to the community.
Now, does this bail denial give us a hint and maybe what the judge might do when it comes to sentencing?
I'm not so sure that that's the case quite yet. The government submitted a letter today to the court saying that the sentencing guidelines in their estimation are 51 to 63 months. The defense submitted a letter saying the sentencing guidelines in their estimation are 21 to 27 months. So it's somewhere around that, in that range that the judge is going to consider. It's up to 10 years on each count. As Lisa noted, and as everyone's noted, it's unlikely he's going to do anything close to 10 years on each of these counts. And obviously, the defense was hoping he'd be released today, and they would argue for sentencing that time served and that the 10 months that he's already done at the MDC, especially in those horrific conditions, is enough punishment for him in this case.
Well, according to Fox News Channel, the judge is suggesting October 3rd as the sentencing day. The defense is pushing for sentencing to be moved up as soon as possible, and they're arguing that most man cases are concerning making money via pimping or minors, neither of which apply to Diddy's case. What do you think the judge is going to do with that information?
So my understanding of what happened is when the defense asked for an expedited sentencing, and what the judge did is he put it on for next Tuesday, July 8th, for them to find out how quickly can the probation department issue what's called the PSR, the pre-sentence report, because the judge can't go to sentencing without the PSR. So he needs the pre-sentencing report, and he needs to know from probation, how long will it take for you to get me a pre-sentence report? Because that's what the judge relies upon. They do a guidelines calculation, and they make a recommendation to the court. They do a thorough investigation, and then they do that. So they're going back next Tuesday. The judge tentatively set the sentencing date for October 3rd, but he said, I'm open for expediting it if the probation department can get me an expedited pre-sentence report. So they're going back on July 8th, next Tuesday at 2 p.m. for a hearing to find out when they could set the sentencing for.
As distributed substances 2 times, that is sufficient for you to find racketeering for RICO. And so when I heard the question from the jury, it dawned on me when I heard the question from the juror asking, wait a minute, so if my friend asks me for substances and I give it to her, is that distribution? First of all, Maureen Comey said, well, the answer is yes. And I thought, oh, hell, we're going to have a real problem with this jury. We're going to have a problem with what's called juror nullification, which we've talked about. But more specifically, the fact that they asked that specific question about the distribution made me realize that their concern is the jury is like, wait. This law just simply doesn't seem fair and doesn't seem reasonable. Because if you're telling us that if we find that Cassie 2 times asked Diddy for substances, and if he gave it to her 2 times after she asked for it, then that means RICO has been proven, then we got a problem. In other words, that means it set it all up for jurors to have difficulty with RICO, but to come back and say, look, we're going to, sometimes we call it like splitting hairs, splitting the baby. We're going to find him guilty of something. So they found him guilty of the Mann Act. And with the Mann Act, that is obviously transportation across state lines for Jane and for Cassie. And then I'm going to share the updates on that. I have this graphic up, y'all. Don't forget, watch CBS tonight, 9 p.m. tonight. I am going to be featured on the Diddy documentary done by CBS called The Verdict. I'm nervous as heck because I don't know. Y'all know I talk a lot. I say a whole bunch of stuff. So I don't know what's going to make it on the air. Hit that like and hit that subscribe as you come in. But we're changing up the share. All right. Now we're going to go back into this bail hearing. So earlier in the day, after the sentencing, Mark Agnifilo immediately asked for bail for his client, right? And the judge was immediately open to it. So I was like, oh, this is going to be interesting. Now, throughout the process, the judge has always seemed very fair. And at the end of the day, all the judge cares about is show me the case. In other words, show me the case law support. If you can find a case that says that what you want to do is valid and is how it's done under the law, he's fine with it. So immediately, Mark says, we want to put up $1 million bail. Please let him do basically be on bail, house arrest at either of his 3 mansions, New York, LA, or Florida. Comey said, oh, hell no. She said, oh, no, Your Honor. We are asking that this court deny bail. And she said, this man has just been convicted and we are seeking 20 years. Did y'all know that in the chat? Shake your Astroglide. I don't know where my Astroglide's at right now. They are seeking 20 years. They want 10 years for each count, and it is 2 counts. Now, I thought that sounded crazy and ridiculous of her, but hey, didn't nobody ask me. I think that sounded consistent. Here we go. Sorry, my ear. That sounded consistent with how the feds go super, super hard. And it was also sounding consistent with, remember, I had told you guys before. I said, even if he is only found guilty of the prostitution, the judge could choose to hand the book to him. The judge could choose to give him all 10 years for the prostitution alone. Now, Comey is going for 20. She wants to stack the 10 on top of each other. I'm going to tell you right now, it's unusual to stack on top. That's not normal. It can absolutely be done, but it's not the standard. But it would not be outside of the realm if this judge who heard all of that evidence decides that based on how he views Diddy to be a danger to the community, X, Y, or Z, that he would then go to the higher end, more of the 10 years. However, that's why this bail hearing was so important. So in this bail hearing, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to share with you the update. In this hearing, basically, Diddy was in there, and when he was in there, multiple people got to speak with respect to why they wanted him to remain on bail. Because remember, Cassie's a victim. Jane is a victim. Cassie's lawyer came in there, wig door, the same one that got her the $30 million, 20 from Diddy, 10 from the hotel. And Cassie's lawyer, baby, came in there and said, told CNN, well, her lawyer then spoke with CNN, right? As well as the court, but with CNN stated that this man is actually guilty of the trafficking and the racketeering, and that there was a lot of mixed emotions in the courtroom after the verdict. Now, specifically, he said, obviously, we would have liked to see the convictions on the RICO charges and the trafficking, but Cassie prompted this investigation by the Southern District, and now Sean Combs stands before the court as a convicted felon of 2 crimes. Hold on. We need to give Cassie her credit for that, because in closing, Mark frequently said, nobody called 911. Nobody called. All people did was call their lawyers. Listen, she needed to have a lawyer to get her to sit down with the cops for the cops to take her seriously because of the power of Diddy and the surrounding facts. Nonetheless, her lawyer added that while, quote, it's not the outcome they wanted, he and Ventura Cassie are grateful. Now, following up. So then, her lawyer then wanted to help stay to court and wanted to help make sure Diddy did not get bail, because for him to get bail would be like a slap in the face. The lawyer responded by saying that Mark Agnifilo, who very much characterized Cassie as a winner, that was insulting. Throughout closing, Mark characterized Cassie in ways that were insulting. You know, he would talk about how sexy she was, as though she couldn't be a victim and things like that. But her lawyer specifically spoke to the fact that she was considered, quote, a winner because she received money as a result of the abuse that she suffered. And Wigdor said he disagreed. She was not the winner, and that Cassie is not a winner, not today, at this point at all in the situation. He went on to then say she's really trying to look forward to the future, but he was specifically there to help support and ensure that there would be no bail today, because it would be a slap. It would be like basically saying, oh, Diddy, you're actually innocent, right? So fast forward. So the judge was basically sick of Mark Agnifilo, remember, the defense attorney. Because remember, throughout closing, Mark kept breaking the rules. He was saying completely impermissible things that actually worked. They worked. For example, like how he said, where are all the co-conspirators? Where are the You're not allowed to do that because the government gets to decide who they're going to call. Well, the judge was sick of him. And the judge told him, you full-throatedly, in other words, you bold-faced told the jury that there was violence. And now you're going to sit up here and be like, oh, no, Your Honor, it's not a big deal. Send him home. So the judge addressed him and says, quote, "You full-throatedly in your closing argument told the jury that there was violence here and domestic v. And you said this is a case that did in fact involve violence." Agnifilo then responded that, "Oh, there's only been evidence of one instance of violence in 2018. And then there was a June 2024 altercation with Jane." What? Boy, what? With Cassie, there were clearly more than that. But yes, with Jane, there was just the one 2018. But there was multiple. And then Agnifilo also said that Combs, that he's entered a battered program. I told you guys, a batters program after the Continental Hotel surveillance footage was released in 2024. Y'all, as an attorney, we know what we're doing. He did that so that when they went to court, if he got found guilty, he would be able to put that in front of the judge so the judge would be more lenient. He also said that Jane helped Combs to write a letter to get into the program and that he is a man in the process of working on himself. Earlier this morning, I was on Don Lemon. And when I was on Don Lemon, I specifically said Diddy is going to come out and he's going to be like, he's working on himself and he's a good person, do all that type of stuff. Well, I want to show you this part, all right? So Inner City Press, I just love how he got straight to it. He said, they brought Combs in. They're waiting on the judge. The judge comes in. They had already submitted all their paperwork, their motion. They had to submit everything by 1. The judge took 4 hours. 5 o'clock was a hearing. Judge said, "I read the submissions. The jury convicted the defendant of counts 3 and 5, and for these reasons, bail is denied." Woo! Bail is denied. It took like 15 minutes. He said, and then the judge said, even if the defendant, I'm gonna make sure you guys can see this. Hold on, make sure you see it. There you go. He says, even if the defendant was solely required to show that he is not a danger to the community, because you got to show more than that, he wouldn't still even meet that burden. Prior to trial, the court denied bail and sees no reason to reverse that now. The defense conceded the defendant's violence. I had to tell you, I was surprised at that. I'm going to tell you why. I was surprised at that because, remember, the main reason he was denied bail previously was supposed to be that he was tampering with witnesses and obstructing justice. Hit that like, guys. Hit that likes, please. We got under 400 likes. We need that likes. I need to make some money, y'all. New York's expensive. So he was denied bail because they said he was tampering with witnesses. Remember, Kalina, he called her over 154 times a week before she's supposed to meet with the federal prosecutors and things like that. But then he was found not guilty of tampering with the witnesses that were discussed in the trial. He was found, which is Jane and Mia. Note, the bail was denied based on allegedly tampering with the singer Kalina, but Kalina wasn't nowhere at court. Can he appeal the bail decision? He sure can. He can. That's my auntie. I love my auntie, but he sure can. But hold on, let me share this. I'll make it a little bit bigger. And I need to make that larger. Go back to this. So with the bail being not denied, here you go. Then the judge goes, it's important to know the temperament of the judge because y'all, this is going to help us predict or get an idea of how he might rule in sentencing. So he says, so basically Mark kept arguing. Agnifilo was like, hey, he was only found guilty of prostitution. Technically, prostitution is not a violent act, right? Because the prostitutes are consenting to the act. So he's claiming, he's not a danger to the community. He's not violent. But the judge is saying, listen, prior to trial, the court denied bail and sees no reason to reverse that now. In that the defense conceded the defendant's violence. The judge said his violence is depicted in the video of Cassie. The defense admitted this is a horrible moment. Domestic violence is the issue, is what he said. It wasn't only that. There was the London hotel incident. Y'all, that was one of the 3 incidents that the government listed as an act of sex trafficking because of the violence. It was also one of the 3 where the jurors asked for excerpts of testimony so that they could review the London hotel incident. That was the one where he whooped on her real bad. I believe that was with Daniel Phillips, the male hooker that was in the room that witnessed it. The judge says there was violence after the searches in this case. As to Jane, there was June 2024 violence after the searches of Combs' residences. The evidence, this evidences a disregard for the law and a propensity for violence. See, when you are deciding things like bail, you can go on crimes that are not charged or negative behaviors that they have not been found guilty of. We call it bad acts, prior bad acts. You can consider any of that because bail is all about supposed to be protecting the public. So I'm going to break this down for you and then I'm going to tell you my thoughts. It says this evidence is, again, a disregard for the law and propensity for violence. In other words, by the disregard for the law, you think you're too big for your britches. You think that you really can just sit up there and do whatever you want all the way up until the time of your arrest. But what's interesting here is he says, as to Jane, there was a June 2024 incident. That was when Jane started it. I call it mutual combat. So according to the judge, though, the judge still feels that Diddy was out of line for how he fought back, fought her as well in that incident. And then the judge says, the court takes no position on what it will consider at sentencing, nor what sentence it will impose. In other words, don't take this to mean that it's going to give you any idea of the sentence, but here the burden is on him, Diddy, and he cannot carry it. The defense argues the guidelines for his crime start at 21 months, but the U.S. says it starts at 51 months, and he's already done 10 months. So the judge is saying, I am setting sentencing for Friday, October 3rd at 10 a.m. I'm willing to expedite it. They said, we want it expedited. We'll need an expedited pre-sentencing report from probation. I'll be available anytime. The judge said there is a great divide on the sentencing guideline. I see that Ms. Comey and has her statute book open. And Ms. Comey's over there talking about something. Well, the rule requires the preparation of a report, absent a reasoned waiver. Probation may be able to expedite. The judge says, update me by July 8th at noon on when they're going to update the sentencing report. And then the judge says, and we will hold a hearing the afternoon of July 8th. Ooh, some of my friends that are still in the city. Y'all, I got to get ready. I'm going to Essence Festival. The hearing on the afternoon of July 8th, they're going to have a hearing regarding sentencing. It's not going to set the sentence, but it's going to basically set the timeline for each side to submit documents as to what they believe the sentencing guidelines should be that the judge should sentence within. And then the defense says, Your Honor has a lot of information from presiding over the trial. We want the sentencing done as soon as possible. Other Mann Act cases, there's nothing remotely similar to this. So here's what got me today. Earlier today, when Comey said, no, we want him kept in jail until sentencing, the judge says, and then the other side opposed it. The judge says, show me a case under the Mann Act where someone under the Mann Act was denied bail. And she was like, okay, I'm gonna work on it. She couldn't think of one off her head because she said she only knew of cases regarding kids. So here we go. The defense then says, well, the cases we're reviewed involve defendants making money or millions involving minors. That's different. Here are the facts from our letter. They got a little letter, blah, blah, blah. We got the letter. Basically, what they're saying is that he should be able to get bail because his prostitution didn't involve no kids. The defense also says, then there was a case, the Emperor's Club case of the former New York governor, and we understand that this is moving quickly. The issue for us, the defense says, is if we had more time, we could have shown the extraordinary circumstances that would warrant bail. That warrant bail. The judge ain't hearing it. The judge is like, no, you conceded that there was violence in your closing. Whether that's relevant to sentencing is not for today. We're not dealing with sentencing today, but it can be considered on a bail application. Defense says, well, in June of 2024, there was an argument that Mr. Combs was defending himself. Judge, Mr. Combs tried to get into a batterer's program in New York. The jury never heard about that. And then he got arrested. All these months later, here we are. The same drive to meet head on, like the self-respecting businessman that he is. In other words, here we are. Basically, if he did this batterers program, jury never heard about that. How come we're never hearing about that before now? Because that's something that the defense absolutely would have and should have brought out at trial, more than likely. And then the judge says, defense says, well, he's been a model prisoner. There have been no issues. He's going to have next chapters of his life. Well, of course he's a model prisoner. They keep him by himself. He ain't got no friends. He don't talk to nobody. Can't nobody beat him up, and he can't beat nobody up. It says there's been no issues. He's going to have next chapters of his life. When you're charged with racketeering, you have dark talks, he says. When I was reading the Mia message for his birthday, I had a hard time doing it. Agnifilo, what are you talking about? He's really just up there singing all of Diddy's praises. But, sir, he goes on to say, his children are here, Your Honor, his 2 daughters. There in the middle of the second row, they no longer have a living mother. Here, the user of the prostitution services has been convicted under the Mann Act. He was acquitted of violence for trafficking, Your Honor. He says he wants to talk to you. Let me check. Oh, shit. I didn't realize this part. Diddy wants to talk to him. The judge says, okay, check. Miss Comey, he wants to talk. Diddy wants to talk to the judge, y'all. Oh, my gosh. Comey says his brazenness is almost unmatched. They suggest that it was the suggestion it was self-defense, and what he did to Jane is insulting. He slapped her in the shoulder. He had substances in his New York City hotel room. He invited Jane. And then the defense says, well, we could craft conditions, Your Honor. Would the court be open to us putting together a bail package? I'm happy to do so. The judge, the bail package is denied. We'll receive, hopefully, a joint proposal on an expedited sentencing on Tuesday and a hearing at 2 p.m. In other words, I'm sick of you. And then the court was adjourned. Bail was denied. So that's why the bail was denied. The bail was denied. In other words, let me pull this off the screen. In other words, what the judge found is, okay, y'all listen to me clear. This is very important. The judge says, okay, I see what you did there, sir. Okay, I see that. You got out the trafficking and you got out of the RICO by yelling all this domestic violence, it's just domestic violence. And the judge said, oh, okay, you're not about to have your cake and eat it too in my court, not in this courthouse. So you want to get off of your other sentences, your life-facing sentences, by saying, oh, I was just a woman beater. Oh, okay, you gonna be a woman beater? Cool. Sit in this jail cell. Sit it. Think about this, guys. How many people do you know, if you know anybody that's ever been to prison, gone to trial and gone to prison, where the person did not make their bail, right? They didn't have bail. They get convicted. And then after being convicted, but before sentencing, the judge says, okay, you can go home to your family. Go hang out, go kiss your babies. Go home and then come back up here. So I can sentence you up to 20 years. Come on. Y'all have a good time. Never. That is a rich man's request. That is insane. Now, it would be different, guys. It would be different if he had already been out on bail. Like, you know how some people get arrested, immediately make bail. So you've been at your house for the last year where people are awaiting trial. That's one thing. Where then a judge may say, all right, I'm going to let you continue to stay out of jail, because you've not been in jail until sentencing. Happens all the time. But for you to be in there for a year, run around, acknowledge your violence, acknowledge your abuse of women, and then sit up there and be like, oh no, judge, it's not a big deal. It's just a Mann Act. It's just a Mann Act. Like, we're cool. Let me go home. I think that speaks volumes to the character of the judge. I was surprised. So I was surprised that bail was denied 3 times the first go round. I have to say that. So then for this judge, and remember, it was denied by 2 or 3 different judges. But the judge stuck by it today and said, I'm going to make you eat your words. Was powerful. I said earlier, we're going to have to see how this bail hearing today is going to go to give us an idea of how he might sentence. I was concerned because the wording that he had earlier today at court was as though, you know, when he told Comey, he was like, oh, I've never heard of a case where someone under the Mann Act wasn't given bail. I thought he was going to be like, slap on the wrist. But no, it sounds like what I predicted earlier, which was this. I had said at the beginning of this, in the event that he's only found guilty of the prostitution, the judge, having heard all the bad stuff that he did, right? Remember, the judge gets to decide which things the judge believes happened. The judge might very well feel, oh yeah, that man burnt up Kid Cudi car. The judge may feel that. The judge, I guarantee you 100%, the judge believes that $100,000 to the hotel was a bribe and that it wasn't for no confidentiality. Remember, it wasn't to preserve their media image. The judge, I don't think the judge would find that. So in other words, the judge has heard all this bad evidence against him, and the judge can sentence him harsher on the Mann Act charges in light of his history of criminal behavior. The judge doesn't just have to be like, oh, this is prostitution, I'm only going to give you 2 years or a year or whatever. So yes, Diddy is facing 20 years. Let me put that. I'm so glad that you asked. Yes, Diddy is facing 20 years. That is correct. Yep. That was confirmed today by Comey in court. What do you guys feel about that number? And I'm telling you, I have seen this time and time again. Thank you so much for the super chats. I'm absolutely going to start answering those. I'm sorry, I was just a little bit on a roll. Let me tell you, I have seen time and time again on the federal system where someone would get off on what they feel they did, that they were guilty of. They get off on something, but they find this federal law and then find them guilty and then just give them a harsher sentence on the federal crime that they were found guilty of, if that makes sense. Who is doing the sentencing? Only the federal judge. In federal court, only the judge does the sentencing. That's how come the jury wasn't even allowed to know how much time he was facing. Only the judge in federal court does the sentencing. So this, I mean, absolutely. While it seems like a huge victory today, I'm saying everybody hold your breath. Everybody should hold your breath. His family, hold your breath. Now, personally, I don't see the stacking of the two. I don't see the 20 years. But depending on how much the judge believes of all the crimes that were presented, right? Let me be clear. To be clear, the reason RICO and the S trafficking were necessary is because otherwise the statute of limitations would have expired for those underlying offenses. It had expired for the bribery. It expired for the arson. It expired for the hotel beatdown. So to be clear, in this case, RICO and S trafficking were necessary to extend that statute of limitations because without it, he wouldn't be able to be tried for any of this. Therefore, what I'm saying is the judge knows basically he got away with a number of offenses and the judge can choose to have a more severe punishment. Now, what I heard there in that discussion there is that the defense is going to create a sentencing basically package. So what happens is each side presents to the probation department basically some facts, some information. So for the defense, they are going to send a bunch of information on Diddy. They're going to talk about how, oh, he was addicted to substances, and oh, how he's grieving the loss of Kim Porter, and but that he's really not that bad of a person, and he's a first-time offender, and therefore they should do the low end of the sentencing guidelines. That low end, I want to say, is the judge had said was around 21 months, okay? 21 months on the low end. Keep this in mind. Whereas the government, and I have this here, the government is like, oh, hell no. We want 20 years. Again, but you use, what happens is there's like a sentencing range, and that is what they are scheduling now, is basically first probation does a deep dive into his whole life. makes an assessment of how likely he is to commit other crimes. That's why him getting up there, or his lawyers getting up there talking about, oh no, I just beat up on women. I just beat up on women. That's why that is significant. So probation is going to evaluate what is the likeliness that he will be violent in the future, that he will use drugs in the future, that he will break the law again, any of that. And I want to just put this back on here. And so what the government is saying, here it is. So right here it says, so Diddy's lawyers are trying to say that he should only be facing 21. The guidelines start at 21 months for him on the low end, but the U.S. is saying that the minimum is 51 months. He does get credit for the months that he's already done one by one. But what is 51 months? What's 50 months? Is that 6 years? 5 years. 5.5 years. So basically the minimum, according to the government, that Diddy would be facing, y'all, would be 5 years. Lord have mercy. I'm going to answer some of these. I'm going to answer some of these super chats.
See the microphones on the extension wands there that people are using. Those cameras are all there in case any of the lawyers come out. Very unlikely that any of the prosecutors will. But there's also, a chance that maybe one of the defense attorneys may come out and give us a soundbite. That's what all the media, including our Fox 5 crews, are out there for too. And then the sprinters, the police are helping them to make this U-turn so that they can get off this block. And part of the street at the other end on the Chatham Square side has been shut down so that there's no traffic coming through now until they get this. Basically, this is like a mini dignitary motorcade here. Here's the Sprinter number 2 here. And those of you in the hip-hop community, you know the Sprinter is the preferred way of transporting music, artists when they're going to the different events and public events and concerts and things of that nature. And police are trying to facilitate this here. The crowd pretty quiet right now, and they're making their way out, and they are leaving without Sean Combs because the judge today, and he was denied bail. So what that means is that he will leave the holding cell that he was in all day today. He will be taken back to the Metropolitan Detention Center, which is right on the Brooklyn waterfront, a very notorious place, very uncomfortable place, even in the best of circumstances. And the lawyers from both sides, prosecution and defense, they have a date for next week to sit down and try and hammer out a sentencing date that is sooner than the October date that was proposed by the prosecution. Okay, they're opening up the street here, and they're allowing the traffic now to come in westbound from Chatham Square, and you see cars coming out of here. I'm not sure who that is, but we guess law enforcement, because they have a full window tint, which is illegal in New York State, unless you have a special permission or have visual problems that you need to have a full window tint. So that's the latest from here. And let me send it back to you in the studio. Reporting live from federal court. Linda Schmidt was with us earlier. I thank my colleague Linda Schmidt for being with us, and we're sending it back to you in the studio.
All right, Lisa, thank you. You and both Linda, excellent reporting on all of this, giving us a lot of color on what's happening there. For continuing coverage on the Sean Diddy Combs verdict, keep it right here on Fox 5. You can download the Fox local app on your phone to watch our live newscast and more wherever you are. We are expecting a press conference at any moment, and we're going to bring it to you live. We'll be right back.
I can tell you that I talked to Sean. For those of you who know, I've known him for almost 20 years. And he's thankful, he's relieved, and he thanks the jurors. I think the jurors did what jurors do, which is they saw through an overcharged, overzealous, kind of a crazy prosecution, and they did the right thing. And that's why, when people talk about tyranny and fascism and everything else, as long as you've got a jury system that works, that's what separates us from the rest of the world. And Sean is thankful. As a helicopter parent, I couldn't be prouder, and I'll let them talk. I don't want to steal their thunder.
Were you surprised, though, that he was denied bail?
That doesn't really, the bail, I think, is besides the point. He was acquitted of the trafficking. He was acquitted of the RICO. Those were always, I thought, as an observer, a ridiculous use of taxpayer resources. This case was never what it was made out to be. This case was ridiculous in so many different ways, and I'm just thankful that the jury saw through it.
But he's still facing prison time. Is it fair?
Sean is, the interesting thing about prison is it's a timeout, and he's had a lot of time to reflect, and he's in a good place mentally, and I'm proud of him. And by the way, for those of you who may miss it, the defense didn't put on a single witness. The defense tried their case within the prosecution case. And at the end of the day, it's a colossal failure by the prosecution.
I know him. In-house? In-house?